One of the primary reasons for a state subsidised mainstream media, in Ireland's case RTE, is to protect that particular broadcaster. RTE does radio and does television. It does some internet, which is rubbish. But to protect that broadcaster from commercial considerations that would otherwise prevent them from being able to broadcast stuff. In other words, to put it in plainer terms, they don't have to worry about the money to make material that can challenge the establishment. That indeed was one of the statutory protections provided by the British government to Channel 4 when it got started in 1982 for its first 10 years. Channel 4 also had a boss, Jeremy Isaacs, who was very committed to pushing that to its outer limit, which is why Channel 4 in Britain was absolutely ripped up the rule book. Channel 4 did. It was a really innovative broadcaster for its first 10 years. And then, if you look closer at how the British government neutered Channel 4, you can see the agenda. You can very clearly see the agenda. But this was the purpose of having a state broadcaster like the BBC in the UK and RTE in Ireland, so that that particular broadcaster could be protected from commercial pressures that would otherwise prevent it from being able to be independent in what it broadcasts. Instead, what we have today, when we most need an aggressive and fearless independent media, with RTE we have an establishment mouthpiece. RTE is nothing more than that. Earlier today, Thursday, the 19th of November, I put a link on this YouTube channel to a documentary done by RTE about 6 years ago, and it was really good. Their programme Primetime. It was very, very, very well made. It was well up to the standard of any other broadcaster in the English-speaking world. It was dealing with the freeman and the land phenomenon. RTE then, sometime after that, did another thing on Primetime about another issue. I won't go into details now, but again, it was superb. It wasn't over the top, it wasn't sensational, but all it did, it was so valuable that I actually asked the copyright. I paid RTE for a DVD of it. They will always sell you parts of their archives if you want. It was about £100. And they sold me that. I don't have the right to reproduce it necessarily, but I could under fair use, and I will if I eventually have to. But again, like that first documentary that I referred to, it was outstanding because it was just asking the awkward questions. Not over the top, not sensational, and not necessarily terribly obvious to those who wouldn't know the right questions to ask. But that doesn't matter. It has to be obvious to those who do know the right questions to ask. That's all. It doesn't need to perform miracles. It's okay. Now, I personally, my epiphany, my red pill, my dark glasses with RTE was last year, 2019. I've said this at length, I'll say it very briefly, in which they said that the then Taoiseach Leo Varadkar had unconditionally apologised for smearing 4 whistleblowing doctors in a hospital in Waterford. He hadn't. He'd said, "I apologise if it seems." That was the point then at which a fearless journalist would have gone after Varadkar and said, "It doesn't seem anything. There's no seam off it. You have not apologised. You are the one who was wrong. Everybody else got it right here." Varadkar said, this is one I got wrong, in his monumental narcissistic egotism. "This is one I got wrong." Oh no, you got many other things wrong as well. It's interesting that John Williams took over News and Current Affairs in 2016 in RTE, and one could notice the shift. Reflecting upon it now, I could see that RTE had stopped being courageous after John Williams took over News and Current Affairs. Varadkar then became Taoiseach without a general election in 2017. There was a post tonight on Twitter. Somebody said, "They must think the Irish people are stupid," and I wrote, "They are. They are." I saw that this year with the general election in which Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael were both returned. And I would hazard a guess that those who voted in this election did not expect what was coming. So rather than replacing Fine Gael with Fianna Fáil, or replacing them with something else, that broad possible alternative that did exist. Instead, we got both. The Irish people made it clear they wanted neither, and instead they got both. So there's a lesson to be learned from this. I put up another video earlier today regarding Freeman and the land. It contains a lot of expletives. The one you're listening to now won't. But then people were accusing me of being bad-mannered and of being rude. So what? So I'm bad-mannered and rude. So what? I'm not. My videos aren't monetized. I'm not a public representative. I'm not even a paid journalist. I'm just a guy sitting at a computer. That's all. But with Freeman and the land, it's the same as what I said earlier. You know, ultimately, you cannot nursemaid people who are going to continue to be stupid. However, Thomas Sheridan uses a brilliant term that has stuck in my mind, the cheese brains. He's right. And when the coronavirus thing broke, let's not even call it a hoax for the purpose of this video. Let's pretend, or let's operate on the premise that coronavirus has exploded across this country in good faith, and what the government is doing, they're doing. Let's just assume that they're doing their best, and that they felt in good faith that they had no other option. That's not actually my personal opinion, but for argument's sake, we'll say that. Even so, by that criterion, RTE still did not ask the questions. Getting back to the cheese brains, there is still a large proportion of the Irish population who rely upon RTE for what they consider to be reliable information. But the problem is that RTE is telling lies. Not only are they telling lies, as I explained earlier regarding Varadkar's false apology, there's a second thing. They're not asking the important questions. Martin Feely was forced out of his job, a public job, earlier this year because he simply started asking awkward questions about coronavirus. That's objective now. This isn't my opinion. He asked awkward questions about coronavirus and he was forced out of his job. One of the things he then said in a subsequent interview to the Sunday Independent, okay, it's a Dennis O'Brien newspaper, okay, it's not great in terms of objectivity, but sometimes it does have some good moments. The Sunday papers, actually, both the Sunday Times and the Sunday Independent, can occasionally deliver some surprises. One of the things that Martin Feely said about the likes, for example, of Tony Holohan and all of these people who are talking about coronavirus and the lockdown and all of these things, is that they speak ex cathedra. Now, what he meant by that was the 6-1 News and RTE starts with a statement coming live delivered by Tony Holohan. Presumably journalists are there. Presumably there are people in the room who can ask questions, but they never do. And when I say ask questions, I don't mean be abusive or insulting. I don't mean use bad language. I mean simply ask the likes of Tony Holohan to justify the premises upon which he makes his claims. That's all. That is journalism. You don't have to be aggressive or abusive to people. You don't have to be aggressive or abusive, but you do need to be a proper journalist, and I'm not a journalist. You do need to say to these people, back up what you are claiming. Many years ago, I attended a public meeting, and it was in November 2009, which was chaired by a county councillor, and a senior member of the Gardaí incriminated himself with a remark. And the county councillor closed down the discussion because I wanted to question that man on what he had said. And I never, ever, ever forgave that county councillor for it. I've made his life a living hell ever since. He's now a TD. And this is the problem. Back then I reflect upon the fact that I knew that particular member of the Gardaí had incriminated himself with a remark, and that county councillor who was chairing the meeting shut it down. I emailed him at length that night to say, you are a coward. You are a chicken. And in 2016 or in early 2017 at a public meeting I chaired, I made sure he paid dearly for what he'd done. But I saw this tendency in a complacent, amorphous mass of the Irish middle class. When you have these people on the rocks, when you have them in a corner, they back away. That's an instinctive thing. And it's what's been happening up to date now regarding RTE and regarding, in particular, the lockdown and the coronavirus. The lockdown in the long term is going to cause very serious trouble in this country. A lot of people are going to suffer very badly. But then you have to ask, well, who? And then get back to the tweet earlier where the person said they think the Irish people are stupid, and I replied, they are. Perhaps a large proportion of this population in Ireland has been too complacent for too long. And that complacency includes a comfortable and lazy reliance upon what's coming out of RTE. There would be a certain overlap with the people in this country who are also quite heavily indebted. That's a certain middle class group. So they have big mortgages, car loans, kids going to private schools, loans for other things. They have jobs that they might, as the economy gets worse and worse and worse, might or might not be able to sustain. Because these kind of people are not necessarily going to be able to survive on €350 a week at their present standard of living. So what's going to happen? Particularly what's going to happen with the mortgage. This leads on to another thing. There was an excellent book years ago that I read, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it changed my whole outlook on finance and money and how to manage oneself. What the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad said was the difference between the middle class and the upper class is that the middle class own things, the upper class own nothing, the middle class control nothing, and the upper class control everything. And that's right. It never left me. It's not about what you own, because that's only a title on a document. It's about what you have control over. And we have this bloated part of the population here in Ireland who, at least on paper, own houses which in fact are mortgaged. If they're not mortgaged, then the bank controls it. You don't really own it, or you don't really control it if it's mortgaged. The problem for so many of those people is that our property market here has been grossly inflated since at least about 1995, 2005, 2015, 25 years. Conservatively, I would say that our property market in this country has been inflated for 25 years. Then put that alongside the fact that there is this particular affliction in the Irish middle class. I may be wrong, but it's more than other middle classes, that your home is somehow an asset. But Rich Dad, Poor Dad says it's not, because Rich Dad, Poor Dad returns to a very fundamental fact. And as soon as it was explained in those terms, I said, yeah, that's absolutely right. It's not an asset if it isn't making a net profit for you. So if you own a home in Ranelagh or Drumcondra or Clontarf, Malahide, and you're paying a huge mortgage on it, but you're not in some way from that mortgage making money back, that in a net sense is bigger than the mortgage, then it's a liability. Anything you own that is not making money for you, even a small amount of money for you, even a nominal sum of money for you, even 50 quid a week kind of thing, if it's not making that money for you, then it's a liability. It's either a long-term liability or a short-term liability, or it's an immediate liability, or it's a later liability. But it is a liability. So all of these people who have their homes where they're living with their wives and husbands and children and labradoodles and whatever you have, they're all sitting on a nest of liability here. That's not an asset. Because what we're watching is, despite the lies of the Irish Times, which has a dog in the race because they own property.ie, nothing's selling. I know that. I live in Howth. I live in probably one of the most normally sought after areas of the city, and nothing is selling. Nothing is selling in Howth. And the Irish Times still propagates the lie in relation to property values by claiming that the property market is based that the positivity of the property market that it claims is based upon the values sought rather than the values presently being paid. Here's another fundamental economic question. It was more raised in Death of a Salesman, ironically, than Rich Dad, Poor Dad. The value of anything is the amount that the next person is willing to pay for it. There's no more to it than that. So you might think that your beautiful home in Clontarf or wherever, Ranelagh or Foxrock, you might think it's worth 2 million. You can think what you like, but what matters is what the next person is willing to pay for it. So this gets us back to Howth, where I'm looking at houses in Howth that people are looking for 2 million for. And the for sale sign has been up there in some instances for over 2 years. Well, I don't know how that's going to turn out for them. Actually, no, sorry, I'm being sarcastic. I do know how that's turning out for them. I do know. To give an example, a specific example, without identifying it, there is a house not very far from me, which dated back probably to the Edwardian age. And it's a large house, and it's a semi-detached. Yet it's 3 stories, might even be 4 stories. And it was built beside another semi-detached house. And the 2 houses, if you looked at them from the front, had a very wide curtilage around both of them. So they were both built with a symmetrical garden that matched both of them and created visually a very nice balance. The owner of one of the 2 houses in the past 3 years built in his side garden another house. So that banjaxed both houses. In the case of his house, it means that there's no longer big grounds around it. So it's this very big house that now has tiny grounds. And in the case of the house next door to it, the second part of the semis, it spoiled the symmetry. That was the act of a short-term, greedy, middle-class idiot. Because he moved into the smaller home that he built in what used to be his side garden, and now he can't sell the bigger home because he's looking for 2 million. He wouldn't get 200,000 because there's another actual rule of property. There's no point in having a really big house in teeny tiny gardens unless you plan to have 17 children. And I wonder if that particular idiot would like to have the kind of people who would have 17 children moving in next door to him. The man is a moron. A spoilt, complacent, middle-class moron. So long as what he does doesn't damage the property values of my parents' home or the amenity of where I live, I don't care. Except to the point where I'm laughing. And I am. Because that house has been on sale now for 2 years. He's looking for 2 million for it. He's not going to get it. He's not going to get 1 million. He's not going to get 500,000. And this is the same mindset that believes everything in RTE. And this was the same mindset that I met when the first lockdown happened. Back in March or April of this year. Saying, you know, Simon and Leo, it's great to have them steering the ship at the helm. They're playing a blender. They are playing a blender. They're also playing a blinder. They're playing a blinder. Oh, yeah. Simon's playing a blinder. Is he now? Is he now? One of the greatest and most acute misappropriations of public funds. I mean, there's a lot of it happening here. You know, like some kind of backward third world country like Zimbabwe. There is a very big problem in Ireland. Of course, RTE and the Irish Times aren't talking about it. Of the wholesale long-term misappropriation of public funds into private hands. I could go on for another hour about specific instances of that. But the most acute and crass example that we've seen is the Children's Hospital. In the wrong location, the wrong design, not going to work. But they went ahead with it anyway. It was Fine Gael who did that. And the Minister for Health in Fine Gael who did that in around 2015, 2016, who signed off in the Children's Hospital was Varadkar. You know, the totes ledge bag of a thish. Totes ledge bag of a thish. That was Varadkar who signed off on that as Minister for Health. Varadkar then very conveniently, around the same time that John Williams then took over News and Current Affairs in RTE in 2016, and Varadkar in 2017 became Taoiseach, and there hasn't been one word of criticism since. So perhaps we're joining dots here when we're looking at this. But 5 billion so far has been thrown into that children's hospital, that useless white elephant of a children's hospital. How many lives have been lost? How many kids remain long-term disabled? How many kids aren't able to get scoliosis treatment or cancer treatment, that kind of thing, because of the money being wasted on this disgraceful criminal white elephant of a children's hospital? Is RTE asking questions about it? No. But I have digressed. We are in a bigger situation now. We're in the situation of the coronavirus. There's now a lot of saber rattling going on about vaccines and masks and all of that. But sure, I looked closer at the masks in August and I realised that it was a bluff, not a hoax, different thing. And that the statutory instrument, which allegedly made it mandatory to wear masks, was actually so poorly drafted and so loosely drafted that you'd never be prosecuted. Because I know what it's, I know how criminal prosecutions work. I've defended myself successfully in criminal prosecutions, on my own without lawyers. I know how it works. I know the burdens that you need to even get a case in the gate of the court before you can get a conviction. So, looking at that statutory instrument in relation to masks, it was so poorly drafted and there were so many get-outs of it. I said, that's a bluff. That's a test. That's testing people to see will they read it and see that there are so many holes in it that it's actually unenforceable. I've been doing a bit of squirreling around. I haven't seen any prosecutions of anybody simply for not wearing a mask. We're not getting, even on the alternative media scene, they're not doing their job as well as they could, because they're not telling us that, from what I can see, the vast majority, if not the totality of prosecutions that have happened for allegedly not wearing a mask have actually been public order. So what has happened has been somebody has not worn a mask somewhere, and they've been approached for it, and they allegedly got abusive with a bus driver perhaps, or with shop workers or that kind of thing, and they were then charged under Section 6 of the Public Order Act. Trust me, they'll go after you on Section 6 of the Public Order Act. They did that to me in 2008 and I was still acquitted. I used lawyers. So they're serious about... Section 6 is used by the guards a lot. Section 6 of the 1994 Public Order Act. It's used abusively. It was used abusively against me, and now I'm suing the state. And I've been engaged in long-term litigation against the state over the abuse of Section 6. You cannot claim that you were put through a vexatious or frivolous prosecution unless you were acquitted. Just as well I was acquitted back in 2008. And after then, I launched the Savage Dogs of Hell against the Gardaí for what they did to me with that. And that's still ongoing. I haven't had any trouble from... Well, I did. There was another prosecution they brought against me in 2015 for blowing my horn too loudly. And I defended myself in that one, and I won. I was acquitted. And I didn't choose the lawyers in that particular one. So I know how these criminal prosecutions work. And if you look at the masks, I'm not aware that anybody has been prosecuted simply and exclusively for not wearing a mask. Because I've refused to wear a mask since August, and I've gone on public transport not wearing a mask. I've gone to the shops. I've gone all around not wearing a mask. Several times at shops I've been said, well, if you want to buy XYZ, do you mind waiting outside? Not at all. I said, I'll wait outside. So I'm cooperative with them. I'm not abusive. I'm not condescending. So they still let me buy the goods that I want to buy. But they're insisting on me staying outside while they go and get them for me. That's okay. That's their right. I think that's perfectly acceptable. I don't have a problem with that. I'm not going to lecture them or get abusive or threatening or insulting with them over that. That's their right. They're still serving me, though. So, it's not as if I've been refused service. So everything's cool as far as I'm concerned. There are a few people in this country, I think, who have been as defiant regarding the masks since August as myself. I've got a lot of abuse from busybody other members of the public. Not so much these days, but back in August I got terrible abuse for a week or so. But I've not been abused by anybody working in a shop. Not once. I was questioned once, and I stood my ground and I said, no, I'm not wearing a mask. I'm claiming my indemnities under the law. That's it. And he let go. He didn't challenge me over it. So that was the end of the story. I've gone very discursive now, but the reality is, what we need at this moment in this country is an aggressively independent mainstream media who should be asking all the questions of those in power. What we have instead is the opposite. We have the diametric opposite of it. We have a lickspittle, toadying mainstream media under John Williams and RTE, which just refuses to ask any awkward questions. But the reality is, first of all, this is a small country in a much bigger arena here. The United States is infinitely bigger than we'll ever be, infinitely more important internationally than we will ever be. We've got to stop patting ourselves on the back about being this great little country and doing a dance in Ballina over Joe Biden. Nobody cares. We're smaller than most of the states of the US. Get over it. That's the fact. And that complacency and smugness, and at the same time cringy desire for international praise, that certain pivotal middle class in this country are afflicted with, that's going to come to an end. I'm not saying it has to come to an end, or it should. It will, because they're the same mortgaged class who are relying on the Irish Times and relying on RTE, yet they don't actually have all that much independent capital to back them up. And those older people who have paid off their mortgages have adult children of their own age, my age 47. And the problem is that those adult children have their children who might be teenagers or younger. And that is what's going to cause the unravelling here. Not the older people who've paid off their mortgages, but the impending destitution of their over-indebted kids, their middle-aged kids, and their kids who are in their late teens. I'm seeing this firsthand. I'm seeing it firsthand. And it's what Bill Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid. It's what Johnny Rotten said. It's all about money. It's what they said in Watergate, follow the money. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And this is why our mainstream media has done us such a grave disservice this year. Such a grave disservice. Of course, the Irish people did themselves a grave disservice by allowing Fine Gael back into government again in February of this year, and that was when I washed my hands.